Hi, I'm Dr. Jack West, medical oncologist at City of Hope Comprehensive Cancer Center in Los Angeles. This is West Wind, a podcast focusing on the intersection of cancer care, emerging technology issues in medicine, and healthcare policy. You can find information about subscribing at beaconmedic.com or wherever you find your podcast content. Please leave a review, especially if you like this, and we'd also love to get your feedback at westwindpodcast@gmail.com. This first podcast was with my friend and lung cancer leader, Dr. David Spigel. We had a great conversation that spanned about 40 minutes and covered so many topics that it split into two podcasts. Here in the first half, we discussed the challenges of conducting clinical research, particularly in a community setting, the growing complexity of oncology and lung cancer and many other cancer types, and how general oncologists can hope to keep up with the latest advances across a broad range of cancers. So I'm happy to be here today with Dr. David Spigel, who is the Chief Scientific Officer at Sarah Cannon Research Institute. He's also a medical oncologist with a particular expertise in thoracic oncology. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Jack.
Now, you oversee a clinical research enterprise at Sarah Cannon that's a rare setting of what seems to run as a large consortium of largely or entirely community-based oncologists participating in clinical trials. But clinical research requires a lot of infrastructure, and it's generally slower than off-protocol treatment when docs need to see patients quickly, and that's one of the big incentives. Sarah Cannon seems to be about as successful as any place has been, but how do you get that broad engagement, and are there a lot of resistance points in actuality?
Well, I appreciate you saying those kind things. We're never happy. I mean, in the sense that there's more work to do. So I do think we can be successful often in bringing clinical research into the community, and you know, we're certainly proud about that and trying to get that to be as excellent as it can be. But by no means have we solved this. I mean, it's something we come to work every day trying to figure out how to get better at it. As you know, clinical research in and of itself is very difficult. It's complicated. There's a lot of regulatory issues. There's a lot of just hoops a physician or clinician has to jump through to have the privilege and right to conduct research at their facility. And as you know, clinicians are busier than they've ever been now. There's more new therapies coming out. It's hard to be a general oncologist and take care of different kinds of cancer and understand the latest breakthroughs and how research plays a role. So I think if anything, it's probably harder than ever now to do clinical research. But we're working hard at it. I mean, trying to, you know, at the end of the day, trying to bring what hopefully is an advance in care into the clinic. Obviously, research is a question. You don't know if that treatment A is better than treatment B, but trying to make that advance, trying to learn if this study is going to be the next breakthrough, the next thing that's going to be successful for somebody. It gives people hope. It gives people reason to be excited about what can be done for their cancer. I think our clinicians, our staff, and our patients and their families want to be a part of something innovative, and so that motivates and drives us. But it is hard. I mean, it's not an easy thing, and probably the easiest thing to do is not to do it. You know, is to just, as you say, give somebody immunotherapy or give somebody chemotherapy and get through your clinic faster. You know, it's certainly an easier way to live your professional life than not do research. But, you know, I don't think you can be an oncologist and not have an opportunity to explore new therapies.
You work in a setting where there are a few subspecialists, and you're clearly involved with the care of this network that is largely general oncologists. You mentioned the challenges of being a general oncologist, which neither you nor I are, but it's hard for us to imagine treating 2 or 3 different kinds of cancer every day, let alone 10 or 15. Do you get a sense that the community oncologists are still finding it tenable, or are you seeing more of a trend toward in the community practices in Tennessee oncology, more subspecialization and just people changing how they practice, maybe relying on sending people for second opinions all the time? I just wonder how tenable it is to be a general oncologist seeing 15 kinds of cancer a day anymore when the field has gotten so complex.
Yeah, I agree with you. I still think doctors kind of gravitate towards certain cancers they're comfortable with. I mean, in a clinic with, say, 4 providers, you'll have one that does more breast cancer than the other doctor, 3 doctors, one does a little more lung cancer. But I think all 4 in this example still enjoy being available to treat all things. Today, I'm here with you at a conference in lung cancer, and that's what I treat. But a colleague called me for a favor to see if I could help with an elderly gentleman with rectal cancer. Well, I used to, in training and when I first came out, I could treat rectal cancer, and I'll be happy to try to help here, and I'll probably lean on my colorectal cancer research leadership to get advice. I feel like there's something gratifying in being a doctor that can take care of anything, and yet you want to make sure you know what you're doing. Like I wouldn't want to be a doctor trying to manage myeloma right now, or manage even breast cancer. It's really difficult. Lung cancer, I always used to joke, lung cancer was the no-brainer specialty to go into. You gave chemotherapy doublet, and that was kind of it. Now lung cancer actually is, I'll joke, is the thinking clinicians, cancer. There's a lot of stuff you got to know about, and from molecular testing to thinking about how you sequence therapies to understanding the new studies that seem to come out every 2 or 3 months. It is challenging. I'm not saying I could be a general oncologist by any stretch, but I don't really see things changing, for the general oncologist. I think they're still going to probably be broad.
I also find myself reflecting on when I entered into the field and the debate was whether it was worth treating metastatic non-small cell for a 7 or 8 week improvement in survival. And then we had a 5 to 10 year period of just comparing one doublet to another. And basically you could give the same chemo regimen for a decade and you'd never be wrong, and you didn't even have to read JCO. Right. And now it's splintered into a very complex algorithm. And I had a colleague who secondarily focuses on lung cancer, came back from ASCO saying, I don't feel I can do this anymore. I'm no longer a lung cancer doc.
It can be overwhelming.
Yeah, and because, there's a stretch of time when every 4 weeks there's a new press release potentially changing the standard of care.
Selfishly, though, that to me, that's what's so exciting. The pace, it is overwhelming, the pace of new drugs, keeping up with things. There's a doctor in my group who calls everything bevacizumab. I mean, and I tell him that's from 2003. We've moved beyond that. I love the pace. I love the excitement. I love the energy of the field. But that's probably from the seat I sit in terms of seeing what are potential opportunities in research. I could see just from a clinician's perspective, it's daunting.
You also are deeply involved with developing pathways, like VIA pathways. And I can see one way to manage this, just focusing more on following guidelines rigidly, seeing whether it's NCCN, VIA, or some others. What's your experience been about uptake of this? Has this been something that general oncologists, rank and file community oncologists are happy to have something that tells them the right answer, or is this something that a lot of oncologists take umbrage over because it's basically pushing them and taking away their autonomy?
Well, I'm like I think what a lot of oncologists now who sit on committees here and there to help talk about what a lung cancer pathway should look like. What I love about these conversations are that they're always based in evidence. What do the data show us? We don't, you just don't choose these therapies over here that have no role in the treatment of second-line lung cancer. So you try to make decisions based on data and then come up with, that treatment is the one that should be used. I'm also involved as a user. I'm a clinician, and I go through these pathways. And Jack, I disagree a lot of the time. I see the selected therapy A is what's recommended for, say, EGFR mutated lung cancer, and that's not what I'm going to use. And so the pathways are just that. They're guidelines, they're maps for care, and at the end of the day, to help reduce costs and improve efficiencies. But they're not laws. It's not set in stone that you can't practice the way you think is best. In fact, there's an opportunity in the pathways, the one you mentioned, VIA, for example. You just choose, I don't agree with the pathway, and then you can tell what you're using. Now, I guess if I keep disagreeing with the pathway, eventually someone will probably give me a report card that tells me you've disagreed with 99% of the pathway, and that could be a problem. But I think probably that's not how it'll end up working out. What will end up working out is most people will give most of what the pathways recommend across disease settings, and then there'll be that 20% or more that just disagree with it. So I think that's fair. Particularly in lung cancer where things change so fast, pathways struggle to keep up with these changes.
And certainly, in my experience trying to develop pathways, it's an enviable problem when the committees can't keep up with the progress, but it's reality. And
we frequently will have a conversation and try to make a decision, and then someone will say, yeah, but that study is reporting out in 2 months, and then we'll say, okay, table this until that comes out. We'll leave it this way, and we'll change it in 2 months. So.
Do you foresee that something like Watson for Oncology or some other machine learning platform could help oncologists interpret NGS panels? Is that pie in the sky? We've heard great things about the concept of AI in oncology or medicine, but that's really fallen short of expectations thus far, which may have been too ambitious.
Right.
However, molecular testing is potentially becoming prohibitively complex, and I think AI could help oncologists distinguish between a MET exon 14 skipping mutation and low-level amplification or some other ambiguous findings that could end up being a rabbit hole. I just think this is where there's a real potential for the killer app value in AI, at least in the next few years, without it trying to interpret nuances of patient care.
Yeah, we're really working and struggling with this right now, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing at our center. We actually are working with a bunch of data scientists and software engineers, and actually our platform is called Genospace. But the idea is this: is aggregate all those data sources, both clinical data sets. What is a patient? What defines a patient in terms of their medical history, their clinical characteristics, their performance status, and then what are the molecular things we know about that patient? You mentioned MET exon 14 skip mutation. Mm-hmm. We can identify that and kind of serve that up to a clinician and say, we know this about your patient. We can do this now, and use that to then not just try to tell them what to do and how to manage that patient, but actually show them what clinical research opportunities are available. So if we have a trial for a patient with a MET exon 14 skip mutation, actually bring that to the clinician there at the clinic workstation and say, you know what, Mrs. Smith, you're about to walk in the room with, or you're seeing tomorrow, we've identified, trial X, Y, or Z that's a good option for them because of these parameters. We can do this now. We're piloting this now. It won't enroll a patient for them. It'll just help sort through these huge data files to simplify what's relevant to get a patient onto a clinical trial. I think you could also use that to apply to pathways. You could pull out those salient features and say, this pathway applies to your patient. You don't even have to enter it. It's done automatically. I don't know if it's going to be Watson or Genospace or something else, but I think it's not going to be hard to imagine that we'll be able to manage data better and use it to help make better decisions for patients. I don't think it's going to be an automatic thing where, some computer is just taking care of our patients for us. But I do think we'll be able to sift through these confusing data sets and be able to distill down to what are the best 1, 2, or 3 treatments. I'm excited too about the discovery piece. Just, wouldn't it be cool if you could take 1,000 people who've gotten this immunotherapy and these folks did this well, these folks didn't do this well, and use analytics to understand what it is about those patients that describe why they did the way they did, and then use that to do prospective studies. I think that's selfishly that's where I'm hoping these large data platforms kind of get us is turning to discoveries and using those discoveries to do prospective research.
Are you using telemedicine at all, either in clinical practice or in your oversight and direction of this complex clinical research enterprise that's relatively far-flung?
Well, I'll tell you what we're doing in Nashville. So in Nashville, we have, we have a lot of clinicians, a lot of medical oncologists scattered across the city and actually the state. And we don't have the ability always, every day of the week, to have research support in every office with every doctor every day. And so how do you offer research, but then you can't support it always with all the infrastructure you need, in this case with research nurses right there every day. So we're piloting now a telemedicine project where, say a clinic that's 20 minutes outside Nashville has a nurse on Monday, but Tuesday through Friday they don't have a nurse. Well, we're now able to identify a patient for a potential trial, say on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, and have them go into a room, and we have essentially a version of an iPad and a telephone, and they connect with a nurse at a central location in Nashville. They discuss this trial opportunity, and we can consent the patient that way. Mm-hmm. Now we'll ultimately hand deliver paperwork and get physical signatures on things, but it speeds the process up. That patient doesn't have to wait to the next Monday when a nurse is actually on site to register them and get the ball rolling. We can do that Tuesday and save days that way. I think this is going to be very effective, and our research nursing leadership is heading this pilot experience. I think it should work. I mean, I don't see why this wouldn't be very successful at a number of clinics to start the consenting process.
But we're not yet at a point where patients can have remote follow-up visits and routine visits.
But I'm aware it's happening in other disciplines outside of oncology, and I think it could happen. I look at my brothers now. My brothers aren't in medicine, but it's funny because they used to call me all the time for whatever ailment they thought they had, and now they like telling me what their virtual doctors are giving them, whether it's a dermatologic issue or even cardiac issue, or orthopedic issue. You can now, as you know well, you can do things over the phone with doctors, FaceTime, mm-hmm. and actually get prescriptions. It's scary, and at the same time, it's efficient. There's been a couple of articles about this this could be the future for large areas of medicine. Oncology is really complicated, and clinical research is even more complicated, so that it's hard to know how we'll use these tools, but I think we're heading in that direction.
Well, I do think that it's becoming increasingly difficult when there's a growing gulf between how much a general oncologist can keep up with,
right,
with the pace of what's happening and what you get from a subspecialist. But you can't expect every patient to travel 90 minutes or
right.
longer to funnel into the same parking lot and get seen in the same clinic to get treatments that are the same ones they would be getting 5 miles from home. And
I was also skeptical that patients would be able to understand technology. And what I've come to learn is that, first of all, that's not true. If people have a phone and know how to use a phone, and not everybody always knows how to use a phone, but they usually can do this. But even if they can't, usually someone in their family can, whether it's a daughter or a spouse. So I think, the technology's there. The things you can do now with just your phone are amazing. So we're probably not far from it.
What are you seeing in terms of testing patterns, NGS, interpretation of NGS, as you're working in this spectrum from broad community-based oncologists to subspecialists? Are there big disparities? Is there hesitation in the pickup of EGFR and ALK? I mean, you're seeing patients in Tennessee where there's a lower frequency of detecting these than on the West Coast, where I'm treating patients who who have a pretty high incidence. And so I think there's a broad acceptance and eagerness to be testing. I'm not sure that's the case in Tennessee, and maybe further you get from the academic center or from Nashville, the less likely you might be to get EGFR, ALK, let alone broad NGS testing. What do you see?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's complicated. It's the thing about the community is it's not one thing. You know, it's for example, I work out of a hospital in downtown Nashville, but then a few blocks away, some of my partners work out of another hospital system. Their pathology departments are set up very differently. And so at my hospital, for example, if I have somebody with lung cancer, we run a lung panel that includes, just so you know, EGFR, ALK, ROS, RET, BRAF, and MET. Across the street, I think you'd be lucky if it's consistently EGFR and ALK. So expand across Tennessee and Florida. It's a heterogeneous collection of different testing. You hope people know what the standards are at those places. In breast cancer, you can't imagine not doing hormone and HER2 testing. And colorectal, you can't imagine not doing RAS testing. And melanoma, you can't imagine not doing RAF testing. But you're never sure. And I think that's where education is really important, to make sure people know what the standards of care are. That's where pathways come in handy. Mm-hmm. We in our research network at Sarah Cannon, we're not prescriptive about what you do. We try to encourage broad-based sequencing to identify patients that could be candidates for a clinical trial. We don't tell people what to do or correct them when they're doing something that we don't agree with. I mean, people practice medicine the way they want to practice medicine. We try to educate and explain to them, if you want to do tests, first of all, here's why we believe in testing. And if you're going to do it, here's what we recommend and how you do it. We notice across our network, we have about, as of right now, about 400 patients a month who are getting some form of comprehensive next generation sequencing. And so that's logarithmically higher than it was 5 years ago. So I think that would lead to the discovery of a lot of things we wouldn't expect to find otherwise, but it remains to be seen. Mm-hmm. I personally don't think ALK is as prevalent as it's reported in our region. Mm-hmm. Can I say that for sure? No, I need to know what a healthy denominator is. I mean, if everybody was testing, what would the real rate be?
Well, besides, I think there's a fundamental difference between testing in Japan or Korea or Boston or Seattle versus what you're going to find in Tennessee.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to think about what does lung cancer look like in different regions. I heard somebody just today at this meeting say that they see more transformed small cell from EGFR than they see small cell. That's laughable to me, because we see so much small cell lung cancer in Tennessee. Yeah. We see some EGFR. It's probably like the 10 to 12% that's reported. But for her to say she never sees small cell, to me, is a whole different experience of being a lung cancer doctor.
We'll continue with the second half of my discussion with Dr. Spigel in part 2. Thanks so much for joining me today for this West Wind podcast. We hope you'll be interested enough to subscribe, either by checking out the options at beaconmedic.com or looking for West Wind Podcast on iTunes or wherever you find your audio content. Please take the time to submit a review, and we'd also welcome your feedback at westwindpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, this is Dr. Jack West. Thanks for listening.